the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Confederacy, and Wendat. We also recognize the enduring presence of all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. Thank you. So we'll move on to item number 2, declaration of possible conflict of interest. Does any of the trustees have any conflict of interest to declare? Seeing or hearing none, we'll move on to the next item. I have delegations to be presented. There's no delegations here. We'll move on to number 4, report from trustees appointed to Ontario Public School Board Association. So, Trustee Arts.
Thank you. I'm just going to be really brief because we sent the report in writing, but I want to highlight one piece in that OBSPA has sent out invitations to all the provincial MPPs for a Take Your MPP to School Day. This is hopefully to be hosted the week of May 22nd. So those MPPs from Toronto that responded directly that they were interested, I have emailed the individual trustees to let them know. Some of you have gotten back to me, some of you have not. So please look to that email and reach out. If I have not emailed you directly, then your MPP has not reached out, and I would encourage you to reach out the other way to their office and remind them of the invitation from OBSPA to take advantage of the Take Your MPP to School Day. And this is an opportunity for them to come visit schools, to learn about the schools in the riding or in the ward, and for us to highlight the great things happening in our schools, the wonderful things happening in public education, and the needs in our local schools and in our system. So please have a look at your email. Please respond if you can, and hopefully most of us can get together with our MPPs. The format for the day is really up to you. If your MPP is available, then it would be great to work with your superintendents and one or more of your local schools to arrange a visit. And I know that our schools love to show off the great things they do. And we will provide you with talking points, resources, whatever you need to help your day work.
Thank you very much, Trustee Arts, for the report from OSPA. We have two items under number 5, staff reports. We'll go to first one, 5.1, planning for the renewal of the multi-year strategic plan update. I'd like to ask Associate Director Salmon to let us know which staff would be taking that on.
Thank you, and through the chair, Assistant Superintendent Elizabeth Otter will be speaking to this particular report.
Thank you, Associate Director Salmon, and through the chair, I'm pleased to be here to provide an update on the renewal of the multi-year strategic plan and seek your approval of the report submitted. The last report on the multi-year strategic plan was in May 2022. The report provided background around the requirement in the Education Act for each board to develop a multi-year strategic plan and the historical context of TDSB's multi-year strategic plan. I'm here to present this report, which updates you on where we are in the process for renewal of the multi-year strategic plan. Given that the current TDSB MYSP plan is nearing the end of its 4th year, it's time to reflect on the existing 5 pillars, consider the board's changing context, and create a renewed multi-year strategic plan that will guide everything that we do for the coming 4 years. The ministry provides guidance on the process for developing the multi-year strategic plan. This process includes getting organized, gathering information, developing priorities, and implementing and monitoring the multi-year strategic plan. We are currently undertaking the first 2 steps, planning and gathering information, and we'll be coming back to you in the fall with an analysis of the information gathered and what that means for the renewed multi-year strategic plan. In February, we began the planning process, and we have just begun the engagement phase. This report provides guiding principles, an engagement plan, and other information that sets the direction for the renewal of the MYSP. And it's important to get your input and approval of this direction so that we can make any adjustments that are needed. As mentioned, we have begun the engagement phase, which will continue through till October. We are working with the Communications Department, the Research Department, and other critical friends who have been supporting our efforts to communicate and engage with all segments of the TDSB. There will be overlapping phases because we will be reflecting on the data as it is gathered to ensure that we are gathering perspectives from all segments of the TDSB community, and that we are thinking about what it means for a renewed strategic plan along the way. This work is guided by a steering committee, which includes trustees, student trustees, the director, superintendents, as well as both academic and business staff. The work is also guided by some guiding principles included in the report. I will not review all of them here, but these guiding principles will ensure that we are centering student voice, gathering perspectives from all segments of the TDSB community, and are engaging with the community in ways that are accessible. Also, key engaging with Indigenous communities and communities that are historically and currently underserved. We know that some communities experience barriers to engaging with the board, and we will be making an effort to engage with these communities primarily through the community support workers, leveraging community relationships, ward forums hosted by the trustees. The guiding principles will also help guide how we engage with the TDSB community, ensure that we are creating safe spaces in which they can participate. The guide will also help us consider the pillars for the renewed strategic plan. The appendix, which is attached, includes a comprehensive engagement plan that specifies how we will engage the various segments of the TDSB community, including students, employees, parents, caregivers, and guardians. The engagement window has been extended into the fall. I will report back to you in October with some of the themes that we have heard so far. Happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you. We'll start with Trustee Laskin. Go ahead.
Chair. I think it's great that the engagement will continue over the fall because we really have to put our minds to budget right now. But I noticed the survey's still open. Has there been any thought to, pausing the survey so we can refocus the public? Not that the multi-year strategic plan work isn't important. I don't mean that at all. But it's somehow to do that, which is so positive, at the same time we're working on the budget. I feel there's a bit of a disconnect, and we want our public to be concentrating on the budget pieces right now. So I'm wondering if staff have given any thought. That survey's been open for quite a while. And I know I'm not going to do a word form on it till the fall because it's too distracting. There's too many things happening. And the spring isn't really the best time to engage parents, in my experience, towards the end of the school year. I think the fall is great to kind of start it again. And I'm wondering if staff have any thoughts on that through you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And through the chair, Ms. Otto?
Thank you. A good question through the chair. The fact that we delayed the engagement part to the fall allows us to engage, as you said, Trustee Laskin, additional community members. The piece around the survey is it also requires a research element and analysis. So happy to take that back, but knowing that there'll be implications at the other end on when we'd be able to analyze and put the piece together. Having the survey close in the spring allows the research department to do a thorough analysis of the themes that have come in.
So if I can just follow up. So when did the survey open through you, Mr. Chair?
Thank you. Through the chair, the survey opened just after the March break.
And when is the survey planned to be closed?
Thank you. Through the chair, at the end of May 31st.
And is the survey in multiple languages through you, Mr. Chair?
Thank you. And through the chair, yes, the survey is located in Qualtrics and is available in multi-languages, as well as there is a self-facilitation guide that is translated in 11 top TDSB languages.
Through you, Mr. Chair, my concern, if the survey is really the only form of engagement right now and we're doing the analysis only on that, I'm concerned that it won't include voices of folks that participate differently. So I'm wondering what's being done about that, and I'm also wondering where student voice is coming into this. I'm wondering if the Student Senate is being involved in any of this. Through you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, and through the chair, Trustee Laskin, we're happy to take that back, the consideration of extending the survey. With regards to the student voice, yes, just had a meeting last week with the Student Senate to be able to capture their voice. So the survey is one method to capture the voice, but we're also having community advisories, community support workers that are also engaging communities in a way that they can leverage their relationships as well.
Okay, and my last question is there anything on the survey or a booth or something set up on May 6th during the PIAC day to engage parents? Is there a computer set up? Can somebody help facilitate people who may want to fill it out? It just seems to be an opportune time to get people interested. So it's just a thought through you, Mr. Chair, to leave with staff.
Thank you through the chair. That is a good idea, and we'll take it back. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Laskin. Next is Trustee Dawson. Trustee Dawson, are you there?
Thank you. Sorry, it took me a minute there. Thank you for the report through the chair. I had a question about the self-facilitation guide for community groups. Are we engaging with community groups and kind of training them on how to use the self-facilitation guide, and what sort of outreach is being done to ensure that's happening?
Thank you. And through the chair, I'll take the first part with the self-facilitation guide. Yes, we are hosting engagement or training sessions, for example, for CAC members, school council chairs, so that they will be able to facilitate their guides out into the communities, as well as we've already engaged community support workers to be able to do that work as well.
Okay, thank you. Another question, what in-person opportunities are being arranged, or is that for the trustees to work together with you on?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, and through the chair. In the spring right now, we are leveraging the structures that are already in place. As we move into the fall, there will be a combination for opportunities for community staff to engage in both in-person and virtual smaller group consultation or engagement opportunities.
Okay. And then my last question is, are we going into this with any sort of, I guess, I don't know if benchmark is the right word. We have heard it said before that the scope of this multi-year strategic plan is quite large, and that maybe it is difficult to accomplish all of the goals within the allotted time. So have we put any thought into narrowing down the goals, or specifically the action plans? Or are we just leaving it at we're gonna have 5 goals again, and we're gonna have a multitude of action plans? I'm just wondering how are we looking forward to the output?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, and through the chair, thank you for that question. It's an important question. It's important that the multi-year strategic plan is accessible to all stakeholders and part of the community. As part of the renewal is an opportunity to reduce and refine as well. So based on the feedback that we receive from the variety of stakeholders, it will be provided an opportunity perhaps to be reduced with the number of goals.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Trustee Lawson, for the questions. Next trustee is Trustee Rajakulasingam.
Thank you, through the chair. It's great to see you, System Superintendent Edo. I know this is an incredibly important process. And obviously, we all know the importance of engaging with different communities. We've heard of the different methods that that you're using. I'm just trying to imagine that we know how important this document is. It guides everything we do. But this process may be, there may be many communities out there that are not aware of the impact of this document, just because they may not be aware of it. So how are we measuring if we are engaging and including diverse and intersecting identities? How are we measuring that to ensure that maybe we're not doing a good enough job, or maybe we're not engaging with enough, or we're not reaching to those communities that where English may not be a first language? How are we measuring that?
Thank you for the question. It's a very good question, and one of the guiding principles is equity. So to answer the first part of the survey and the self-facilitation guides has two components to it that help us with that. The postal code, which we can, through research, connect that to the Learning Opportunity Index across the 4 quadrants of the TDSB, as well as the demographic data that we have as well. It is voluntary, but it asks people to provide some identity information that allows us to track where we are. As part of the process, we've built in milestones to take a look at where we are, and it will allow us to do a little bit of a pivot if we see that there's some areas or community members that are not at the level of engagement that we'd like to see.
Thank you. And through the chair, just another question. I'm sorry if I missed this, but are we also engaging with kind of our Heritage and History Month committees? Because I feel like they also kind of have, they represent voice that where they might know of other opportunities to engage with those communities. They may know of methods that maybe we might be overlooking. So are we engaging with those communities as well?
Thank you. Through the chair, yes, the Heritage Communities is one of the stakeholder groups that we want to make sure that we reach out to specifically.
Okay, thank you so much. That's it for me. I'm looking forward to seeing how this process unfolds. It's very exciting.
Thank you, Trustee Rajakulasingam. I don't see anyone else on the list, so we will be closing that item. Do we need to move a motion to receive report update? Yeah, can I get somebody to move to receive? Trustee McLean?
We need a mover and a second.
Mover is Trustee McLean.
Shernis Lynn.
Trustee De Devitis is seconding, and all those in favor? Do we need to vote on eScribe or we vote eScribe? Okay.
Shernis Lynn in favor, please.
Trustee Lee's in favor.
Dawson
in favor.
Dawson in favor.
Wong in favor.
Trustee Patel in favor.
Trustee Rajwani in favor.
Trustee King in favor.
Trustee Williams in favor.
Trustee Hastings? You voted? Okay. Trustee Rajakulasingam, Trustee Patel?
In favor, thank you.
In favor.
Hastings was in favor. Sorry about that.
Trustee Srisandaraja?
In favor.
Trustee King? Sorry, I know a number of you were speaking at the same
I have voted in favor. Trustee King in favor.
Thank you.
I'm in favor too, Mr. Chair.
Trustee Patel in favor too. Sorry. All right, I think,
Trustee Earhart in favor in case it didn't show up on eScribe.
all right, thank you. We'll move on to number 5.2, Caring and Safe Schools Annual Report 2021-2022, and Associate Director Salmon.
Sorry,
Thank
Madam
you.
Chair, on the previous vote, Trustee Lee voted in favor as opposed to being absent. Thank you.
The correction is noted. Okay,
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I might have said Madam Chair. My apologies.
that's all right. So Trustee Lee is in favor. If any of the other trustees have joined after we started, after we did the roll call, please let us know once you're joined. Thank you. If anybody that has joined after the roll call, please let us know. Okay. All right, we'll move on to the report, Associate Director Sam.
Thank you, and through the chair, I'll ask Executive Superintendent Spiropoulos to present this particular report.
Thank you, Associate Director Salmon. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, and through the chair. You have before you this evening the annual Caring and Safe Schools report, and it is a report which summarizes the student discipline data, that is with respect to suspensions and expulsions in TDSB for the school year 2021-2022. And before we push forward, I want to acknowledge and thank our amazing friends in research, Samuel Zhang and Dave Cameron, who contributed a great deal to this report, as well as to the entire Caring and Safe School team, over 100 strong, who make this report come to life each and every day through the amazing work that they do. Mr. Chair, this is the second year that we're using a revised template that was created through staff's collective work with you over many months last year, and it is more detailed and offers greater depth than reports have in previous years. And to that end, we especially want to thank Trustees McLean and Chair Chernos Lynn for helping us get there, again, over many months, working together last year. An important point to consider, Mr. Chair, as we go through this report is that for the sake of comparison, in 21-22, we have used data from the school year 2018-2019 because it was the last year that was not interrupted by the pandemic, and as such is most similar in structure to 2021-2022, knowing, of course, that both 1920 and 2021 were created conditions where schools were closed to in-person learning, and as a result, the data from those years is skewed. As we dive into the data, Mr. Chair, I would like to ask you for the following: that when we examine the data in this report, it's important to do so in order to identify patterns to better understand student discipline processes in the TDSB. And when we do that, it must be in a critical way which always takes into account our commitments to truth and reconciliation, human rights, equity, anti-racism, and anti-oppression. This data should never be used to problematize, stigmatize, or reinforce harmful stereotypes, but rather, we're going to continue to use this data in our board to interrogate and interrupt systemic and individual biases which exist in student discipline processes and contribute to streaming. Because make no mistake about it, to use words that my friend Associate Director Salmon often does, when we press the button to suspend a child, we change their trajectory with respect to their academic achievement and what happens later in their career. So to that end, when we look at the numbers from the last school year, we know that we've experienced a 37% reduction in suspensions when compared to 2018-19, and we also experienced 10 fewer expulsions. Mr. Chair, we have literally eliminated suspensions for students in kindergarten through grade 1, and there were 5 suspensions for students who were in primary grades, kindergarten to grade 3. This continues our board's downward trajectory with respect to the number of suspensions and expulsions. And I want to be very clear, Mr. Chair, at this point, that this has happened because of the commitment that our central staff continues to demonstrate when working with local administrators with respect to managing student discipline proceedings. This has not happened because our administrators have been given direction not to suspend or to hold back on student discipline proceedings. But rather, our work is aiming to remove the automaticity that once existed in this board with respect to a child's behavior and what the consequences were for a specific behavior. And to that end, and just by standard of comparison, Mr. Chair, I think I was looking up some data as we were getting ready for this report. And while we had this year a total of, in 2021, we had 3,505 suspensions. Some of you may remember a time in 2001, 2002, when TDSB recorded 24,238 suspensions and just under 100 expulsions. It's a different day, and we're working differently than we ever have, knowing the impact that sending a child home on a suspension or expulsion has on them. As we go a little deeper into the numbers, Mr. Chair, we know that male students continue to make up the large majority of students suspended at 74%. And students with special education needs excluding gifted, accounted for 52.8% of suspensions. It continues to be a disturbing number, but the silver lining with respect to this data, Mr. Chair, is that for the first time ever, I believe based on the positive work that is happening with central staff working with principals, we are seeing a downward trend, and the data is beginning to trend in the right direction with respect to students who have special education needs being suspended and expelled. Moving on, Mr. Chair, students who live with one parent, particularly mother only, were suspended at a disproportionately higher rate. Students from low-income families were also represented in suspension and expulsion data. And with respect to ethno-racial identity, Black students, Middle Eastern students continue to be represented at rates much higher than their representation in the population. East Asian, Southeast Asian, and white identifying students were underrepresented in this data. Mr. Chair, before I move on, I think it's important to just highlight some of the information from that last point. And in order to do so, I would like to direct you to page 100 on the agenda. It's the page with figure 12. And figure 12 is called Distribution of Suspensions and Expulsions by Student Ethno-Racial Background. And I think it's important to address this point because it's part of the reason why this report is here. Going back again to the early 2000s when TDSB was sorting through some of these complex issues related to student discipline at the Ontario Human Rights Commission. And I want to draw your attention to the trend since 2016-17 for Black students being suspended. And in 2016-17, Black students were suspended at a rate of 36.2%, which was roughly 3.5 times the representation in the population. In 2021-22, that number has fallen to 27.5%. And that 5-year trend, after literally many, many years of that number moving in the opposite direction, is a positive in relation to the work that we're doing. It is not an accident that this data is trending in that direction, because as many of you recall, 2016 was the year when we began to really infuse our equity work into the work of caring and safe schools. But I want to make it perfectly clear. This is not cause for a celebration. It's not. And I want to read directly from the report with respect to what this may mean, because despite the positive changes, it must be acknowledged that Black students in TDSB continue to be suspended at a rate greater than 2 times their representation. TDSB acknowledges that there continues to be great urgency in consciously addressing anti-Black racism and its manifestation in student discipline matters. Mr. Chair, we are going to continue to do this work with great intensity until that gap that we've experienced since the inception of this board is reduced to the point where the gap does not exist between the rate at which certain students are suspended at relative to their proportion in the population. Mr. Chair, I also quickly want to draw your attention as I wrap up to a really important point that is contained in this report, and it's groundbreaking work that the TDSB has done, and I use for the definition of groundbreaking stuff that's not happening anywhere else. So to that end, I want you to take a look at page 90 on the agenda. Some time ago, this board made a very bold move to accompany a rather bold move that was made by the Ministry of Education in relation to suspensions, discretionary suspensions for students in kindergarten to grade 3, which were to be eliminated. And you as a board voted that not only would we move to eliminate those suspensions, but we would move to eliminate and expunge and suppress suspensions for students who had been involved in student discipline issues over the course of their academic careers. Here's what that work looked like.
Excuse me.
I think I may be referring to the wrong pages because I have a previous, I'm looking at the one from the last meeting.
Can you tell us the page in the report?
It is page 6 in the report.
Thank you
Trustee
very
Laskin.
much.
Thank you for that. I sense that there was something going on down there administratively, so thank you for the heads up. Okay, so here's what that looked like. To date, the total number of suspensions suppressed is 253,971, impacting 102,631 students. The total number of letters sent to active students informing them of the suppression of a suspension or an expulsion is 12,382, and this affected over 5,000 students. That's a lot of letters. We had to do that with great care, so we didn't press the button all at once and would crash the database, because that's what we were looking at. And I can't tell you the excitement and the thrill, and it's even difficult to express the emotion of some parents and students as they're receiving these letters. Because as many of you know who've been involved in these processes, one of the questions that families often ask when their child is involved with respect to student discipline is, will this ever go away? Thank you for making the move so that some of these may go away. Mr. Chair, and finally, this data is nothing without an action plan to continue to address it and to continue our good work and the downward trajectory. The action plan is included. It fits very closely and tightly with the collaborative approach to school and community safety, the update for which you will be receiving in mid-May, and we will provide you with more details. At this point, I am happy to turn it over to you for questions, and thank you for the time.
Thank you very much for that report. We'll start with Trustee McLean.
Thank you, and through the chair. I think it's those numbers at the end were really dramatic, and I thank all the staff for all the work that went into that, and I agree that with Associate Director Salmon stated, stated on his behalf, the concern, and I hope that that work minimizes the concern around the long-lasting negative effects of suspensions being in place, and that we're not expecting them to wear a scarlet letter around that says that they are damaged goods. They are young children who make a mistake, should learn from their mistake, and we should help them learn from their mistake and be able to continue to excel. So I thank everyone for all their efforts in that regard. There's a lot of numbers and a lot of, which is great, but it's easy to get caught up in all that. So I've picked out a couple that stood out to me that I'd like to explore further. The suspensions for the grade 9s were dramatic. Sorry, I should do what was suggested. On page 8 of the review, there was the suspensions for grade 9, 627 with 435, which that meant we had like 192 repeat offenders, which is like 31%. And 627 is dramatically higher than any of the other numbers. So I was wondering, do we, and I don't teach in secondary school, so I'm wondering if we make a connection to the added freedom that comes with, and less structure initially that students are experiencing as secondary school begins, and that all of that change in a structured environment isn't necessarily a positive thing. And I guess my question becomes around how intentionally are we about trying to change this, because it seems to improve. The longer they're in, they seem to adapt and they seem to make less mistakes that occur in grade 9 and there's certainly a smaller percentage of repeat offenders. So that there seems to be something going on in grade 9, and I'm curious from a staff point of view if this is something we're making a cognizant effort around trying to recognize and trying to curb.
Yeah, so through the chair, thank you for the question and an excellent pickup. And I think the word that was used by the trustee was dramatic. And here's a reason why that is even more dramatic, because that's not something that occurs year after year. In fact, over many, many years, grade 9 was not the year of high school where the most students were suspended. It has been grade 10 consistently. Something happened last year. And that's what we're trying to explore with staff that is school-based. And I'm not sure if it had something to do with transitions or students who were a part of virtual learning for some time and having had a break from being in school, or perhaps the routines, but something happened last year that we haven't experienced in some time. Grade 10's the year, grade 7's the other one. And it was different. And we're right just now in real time trying to figure that one out, especially with respect to transitions and what it takes for students coming into grade 9 to become more acclimatized to what the expectations are and what the code of conduct is in high school and how we can best support them. Now, I have this to say. We do know that students, generally speaking, are struggling in terms of their well-being, in terms of the resources that students have available to them in communities. And even from our own experience and the anecdotal experience from students, when you walk into high school in grade 9, it's hard. And if you're walking in less prepared than students have been in the past, this is how it manifests itself. So more to come on that as we examine it and try to unpack why this happened when it hasn't really happened to us in a long, long time.
And one just more, if I, through the chair. It was concerning to me, I guess, that students with special education needs are such a dramatic number here. And I guess I'm interested in exploring whether through Caring and Safe, the team at Caring and Safe in conjunction with our administrators, are we sure that we are, constantly examining whether all the, potential mitigating factors are potentially being in play and that that the students are really responsible for the poor choice that they made, and sometimes that it's it's a challenge that they live with, and it's not a byproduct of some of the challenges that some of our students face, and this surfaces in such a manner, and that sometimes we find ourselves suspending them for these things. Is this kind of like omnipresent when we're dealing with these? Because these numbers seem high. Like there seems to be a real correlation, and I guess that's a concern. We do the hearings, we talk about mitigating factors all the time. So I guess I'm just trying to confirm, I guess, that we're really on top of this and making sure that that it's not a problem, I guess.
So thank you, and through the chair, I will say in response to that question that we are working more consciously than we ever have before with special education needs in mind. And that means bringing special education staff to the table when we have the opportunity to do so. When the trustee mentioned that it was worrisome, yeah, it's as worrisome as it can be for us too. It's a stubborn one that, as you can see, we are making just very, very slow and incremental progress at. And sometimes that can be indicative of systemic change, incremental change, which we experience over a longer period of time. I believe in our staff. I believe that they understand the expectations with respect to including not just expertise around special education staff with respect to resolving these issues, but also availing themselves of all the learning they have to do. So when they sit with principals to address these issues related to student discipline, they're putting special education right in the middle of the table. We just haven't experienced the gains at this point that we thought we would have, in spite of our best efforts to this point. We're going to be as stubborn and persistent, however, as this data is in addressing it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee McLean. I'm going to pass the chair over to Trustee Arts.
Go ahead.
Thank you to staff, through you, Madam Chair, for all the work that's done in preparing this report. It is fairly comprehensive and tells quite a bit of information for us to shape how we intervene, how we program, how we plan. And also, as Superintendent Sparapoulos mentioned, there's hundreds, if not thousands of people behind, worked hard to reduce this number. I remember, I'm aging myself, at least 20 years ago, organizing to get the Ontario Human Rights Commission to have a look at it. A couple of schools in my neighborhood would reach 20 expulsion easily. Now we have a situation where we have the entire school board. Looking at the number makes me very hopeful. But at the same time, as mentioned, we still have this disproportionality to deal with. And one child falling through the cracks because of a punitive measure is too much. So I wanted to ask some questions related to this. And Superintendent Sparapoulos, through you, Madam Chair, was saying that elementary school had 5, but I'm looking at Table 2, and elementary school on Table 2 has 0. Just wanted to confirm if there were any expulsion in elementary or if it was 0 expulsion in elementary.
I'm just jumping to the table.
Can you stop the clock, please?
Are you referring, through the chair, to page 8?
Can we stop the clock, please? Yeah, sorry, go ahead, yeah.
Were you referring to page 8?
On the report, page 7, on the thing where I'm seeing.
Okay, so I see it. So with respect to primary students, we know that when we looked at the data, kindergarten to grade 1, there were no suspensions for those students. But when we looked at K to 3, there were 5 suspensions that fell under Section 310 of the Education Act and were mandatory. I think the trustee asked the question related to expulsions for that specific group of students. And what we're looking at in Table 1 is that there were 0 expulsions of elementary school students. Because again, I want to stress this point. One of the pieces of data that's not mentioned in this report is that students who are expelled from school, whether it's in elementary or secondary, over 90% chance that they do not graduate from high school, according to research services. Pressing that button in elementary school, I think it speaks for itself. We do everything that we possibly can to keep that number and continue to keep that number at 0. It's 0.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, it was very helpful to have the list of infractions, the kind of trends around some of the key themes around respect, substance use, weapons, internet, and hate-related or bias-related reasons for expulsion and suspension. We had a human rights report at the same meeting, the previous half of this meeting, and we were talking about documenting hate, race, any form of bias-related incidents. How is that being tracked as part of this process to help to shape some of the educational interventions that are necessary?
Yeah, thank you, and through the chair. That's an excellent question because that same question came up when we were discussing the human rights report in terms of trend data. And although it's not here, it's an excellent idea for how we can make this report even better with respect to showing that trend data. But let me answer the question because I had a chance to take up some jot notes with respect to on page 10 of the agenda, the trustee is referring to types defined by Section 310. And if you go to the bottom of that section where it says any activity listed in Section 306 motivated by bias, prejudice, or hate, it's really the same stuff, everyone, that goes in the human rights portal. So let me say this. In 2021, there were 164 of those incidents, which made up 4.7% of all suspensions. I went back all the way to 2016-17. There were 10 of those incidents. It's not because they weren't happening. That accounted for 0.1. In 2017-18, there were 13. That accounted for 0.2. Let's fast forward to 2019-20, which included the pandemic. From 10 in 16-17, we jumped to 91, which all of a sudden represents 2.5% of all suspensions. And then in 2021, when students were off school for a big chunk of time, all of a sudden there were 180 of those incidents. That's almost 20 times what we experienced just a few years before. So the important thing to take into account is that it's not that these incidents weren't happening in 2016-17. It's that they weren't being picked up and that enough attention wasn't being drawn to them. So when you look at the 164 incidents, I believe that that continues to be an underreporting, but it really is at a place now where in the pandemic, everyone, we had an explosion of these during virtual learning. Hate-motivated material in terms of suspensions and expulsions made up 1 out of every 5. 1 out of every 5. And it surged dramatically. We're going to create that table for a subsequent report, but the important thing to note from that question is, yes, we are connecting with the Human Rights Office to make sure that the data is telling the same story, which it is in this instance, and knowing that underreporting of these types of incidents by no means gives us a picture that we're doing better. It just means that people haven't been reporting it to the extent that they are now. So thank you for the question.
Thank you to staff through you, Madam Chair. I guess it could mean quite a bit of different things as well. One, more reporting, more intervention by the staff as well on things that they might have not taken seriously before in terms of.
Yes.
But at the overall, as somebody who's not interested too much on the punitive measures, we got to figure out how do we stop them from, young people getting to a stage where they are engaging in hate. How can education prevent that so that they're not ending up there, off track. My last question, maybe not last question, second last question, is around this multiple suspensions. There's maybe 3% that have 3% of all suspension, not 3% of the student population. 3% of all suspensions are multiple suspension over 4. Almost 10% are more than 10, 15% are repeated suspension as well. Is there a process in Safe and Caring that are looking at these students and looking at supporting with increased intervention to ensure that repeatedness doesn't get normalized in their lives?
Thank you, and through the chair, absolutely. One-on-one. Caring and Safe School staff, students who are in program, we know that when you get to that 2, 3, 4 mark, remember we talked about academic achievement related to one suspension? When you're at that, then it's impacted dramatically. We know those students by name, and those students we pick up and support on an individual basis through Caring and School staff, as well as local staff within schools.
So my second last question is, there is a good news story in this introduction, and that happened not by accident, by program, by intervention, and so on. How do we get that documented and shared so that we can actually reinforce that in multiple spaces? So for example, the restorative justice, the mitigating circumstances, the principle, would there be an accompanying report next time that can show a bit more detail of the interventions and the kind of measures that have been working to kind of keep reinforcing and maybe even invest further into?
Yes, through the chair, we try and do that at every podium and every microphone and every platform that we get, especially during times such as the ones we're experiencing, where there are some difficult and even catastrophic incidents. But every opportunity we get, as well as through the board's normal communication channels, we try to get our message out. And I will also say that if trustees would like to see the report tweaked, revised, I think folks remember that we went through quite the process, even bringing the template here for you to approve. Happy to do so again if you think that it would give you more of the information that you need in order to make better decisions.
I got 35 seconds. The last question is related to what happens to, I know this is not part of this report, but what happens to young people who go into those schools that are dedicated for suspended and expelled children? We had a report recently on that, but when would we be able to expect another report on how we are supporting those young people who have been placed into these alternative programs? And again, accessibility of those programs, proximity of those programs, and so on as well, particularly from a Scarborough perspective.
So thank you for the question. And let me say that Caring and Safe School programs are a bridge rather than a destination. Caring and Safe School programs are not intended for students to be there and to be there indefinitely. I will say this, there are students every year who graduate from those programs because that is the place where they have found success, and we're not going to tamper with that. If a student is there and they've done better than they've ever done, or they're close to graduation, and we think that that is the best way forward, then that's what we'll do. But the ultimate goal of those programs is for students to land back in a regular school setting and be more successful as a result of the skills that they've taken up. With respect to following up on a report, glad to produce that at your pleasure, Mr. Chair, however you would like that direction to come to us.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the report, and thanks for your work, Superintendent Spyropoulos. Take the chair back. Okay. I'll take the chair back, and now it's Trustee Art's turn.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. I want to circle back to the special education students and the high percentage of students with special needs that get suspended. So I'm concerned. So I'm concerned about the high number, but I'm also concerned that just knowing the reports from my schools, like the interactions with the schools in my ward, that a lot of those repeat suspensions reflect students who can't always control their behavior. And even though they have an IEP, when things go sideways for them, they get sent home, they get suspended. So I do have some questions about stuff I actually don't see in the report. Thank you for the report. It's very comprehensive. I am glad to see that the numbers are coming down overall, that the changes the ministry has made and we've made are coming into place. But under this special education piece, in addressing the section, the paragraph on addressing the high rates of suspensions and expulsions for special education students, the report doesn't mention coaching or PD for staff on intervention strategies, safety plans, learning plans, or learning and adjusting learning plans. Because these students, there's a lot of students who, have a hard day, they blow up, they don't have control. It is a mitigating factor. They don't have control. But what I'm wondering is, how are we helping staff to understand those individual students better so that the reaction isn't just to send them home, and it's, to put better plans in place to address those needs?
So thank you for the question through the chair. I believe that there are some interventions that are in the action plan with respect to addressing suspensions and expulsions and student discipline, generally speaking, for special education, students who have special education needs. I will say that with respect to how staff is supported, it happens in real life situations as staff are working through the issues. One of the things that is somewhat of a problem for us, however, is that caring and safe school staff who have all this wealth of training typically get involved for more serious incidents or when suspensions are longer. So one of the things that we've been able to unpack is that suspensions related to special education students often have a shorter term. And principals don't always have to pick up the phone to work through one of those situations. And how we are trying to address it is to make it more of a cultural piece. So when a student who has special education needs is involved in one of these processes, then principals have the ability to be able to reach out and ask and have more people around the table, if you will. But I will say this, I do believe that principals are working differently than they have. I don't believe that there is the same level, again, of automaticity as that there always has been with respect to students who have special education needs, but it is a stubborn and persistent problem which we have not addressed successfully to this point. We are continuing, and if trustees would like in the future to see more, perhaps a special section in the report which discusses that specific issue, we're glad to be able to bring that information forward. I think Associate Director Salmon may have something to add as well.
Thank you, Executive Superintendent Spiropoulos. And through the chair, part of what the Special Education Department has embarked on has been what is called crisis prevention intervention. And that is a training that has been provided to staff, but we've also been very intentional around providing it to many of our congregated sites and also many of the staff that are involved with students with special education needs. It's actually the first aspect of the training is learning how to de-escalate situations. There's two components of this particular training, and 15 years ago, I actually was a trainer in this particular area, and we spent literally, it was a 2-day course that we ended up First, starting off with how to de-escalate by using proximity, by looking, by using your voice, by using tone, by using some of the nonverbals in order to de-escalate situations, as opposed to the second part of the training, which was about using how to do restraints. But the reality is the first and primary one that we're trying to work through our system is to de-escalate using nonverbal types of cues in that type of training. Thank you.
Thank you. I think more of the cases that I hear about are kids in regular classrooms who not, as opposed to kids in an ISP class or congregated site. So I know that we're still collecting some of this data, but I would really like to see how the suspension and expulsion data compares to refusal to admit data when we have that, and whether that data can be connected across student IDs, because those same, I know that those same, some of those same students who get suspended from time to time also have been subjected to less formal send homes or half days or refusals to admit. But I know that that data is not complete yet. Do we have numbers? The description of the Caring and Safe programs is great. Do you have numbers for the numbers of students referred to Caring and Safe programs after a disciplinary action versus how many are sent there on referral?
No.
I also know there's kids sent to the programs for the 4-week programs.
So thank you, and through the chair, the Caring and Safe School programs have two really different parts to them, as I think the trustee alluded to. And through the chair, the first one is for programs for suspended and expelled students. And then there is an attendance and support program. And students often move from one to the other, especially students who are having success. And we've reached that decision after consultation with their families and caregivers. We don't have those numbers for the purposes of this report. We've never included them in this report. But again, happy to be able to provide them through some vehicle if we have that direction.
Thank you. So maybe that could come together. I think earlier this year, I don't remember the date, but I did ask about SAL data, and I get that it's maybe not appropriate completely for this report, but the supervised alternative learning data and those attendance and support program data, it would be great to get that in a report somewhere, wherever staff feels is appropriate, because there's a lot of overlap between special education, alternative attendance, caring and safe. And I think it's sometimes a lot of the same students. The other piece at some point it would be nice to see is how many students who land in caring and safe after a disciplinary action attend regularly. I know when we have discipline hearings, sometimes students are. The report will be students are attending and they're being successful, and sometimes it's like they haven't shown up or they haven't wanted to attend. So it would be great to know the attendance numbers, I think especially for older students. We get that impression. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Arts. We'll go to Trustee Lee.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, first of all, to our staff members for putting together this very comprehensive report. I feel like I learned a lot about our suspension data and processes. I do have one question regarding, I guess, a double click into the data. Through you, Mr. Chair, does our staff members know what the total number of suspensions as a proportion of a suspendable event or a violent offense is?
Through the chair, no. I think that that's something that we might be able to calculate, but we don't have a record of that tonight.
Got it. And as I know that,
Just for the
through,
sake of
through
clarity,
this,
sorry to interrupt, Mr. Chair. Can I just get a repeat of what the specific request was? Because I found it very interesting and I'm not sure I heard it in its entirety. Can I hear that again?
yeah. Yeah, I kind of just want to get the understanding of what the total number of suspensions as a proportion of total violent offenses are.
Okay, I thank you.
Sorry, do you have an answer or no?
No, I don't. It's the same answer. I just
Okay.
wanted to make sure that in light of the answer that I gave, I had understood the question correctly.
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Okay, so then I guess the follow-up question is, I know we're going through this process and we want to make sure that every child is given the chance and the education and the help that's required. What level of confidence that we have that what we're doing with the good work that we're doing is resulting in a decrease in the number of incidents and offenses, as opposed to just decreasing in the number of recorded punishments?
So thank you for the question. And through the chair, I think that when a student is suspended, they're suspended for behavior that would fall into a category of being contrary to the school's code of conduct. And I think depending on how you record incidents, there is an absolute reduction in incidents that are impacting the code of conduct. And we can make that conclusion based on the reduction in the number of suspensions. This, however, can also be tied, and where we have more work to do is in relation to, let's take, for example, incidents which by the ministry definition qualify as violent incidents. And if the question is, how do we know that our approach to student discipline and the reduction in suspensions, which are a part of that, impact violent incidents? I think that's a difficult one to answer, especially because there are so many factors, especially most recently, which have contributed to violent incidents in communities, which have then spilled into schools as well.
Okay, so I guess, thank you for that. I think I'm starting to understand, but I guess going back to, my question on, which is a direct question from the parent community, actually, how do we know that what we're doing is actually helping our students in a way with, and how do we think we can demonstrate that quantitatively? Because you have a lot of data in the report. I think it's a very data-driven report. And I'm just wondering, what can we do to incorporate a more, I guess, lower or fundamental level of data into this reporting to say that, look, what we're doing here is helping students, because not only are suspensions going down, but total number of incidences are also going down. I'm just not sure if I can properly or confidently answer that question from our parent community right now with this.
Let me try again. I think that it is easy to conclude that based on the dramatic decrease in the number of suspensions, the number of incidents as in schools has also decreased. What perhaps the trustee may be asking through the chair, if I'm sort of reading into it, is there are these incidents that are occurring, which can be classified as violent incidents, and we've heard that those are perhaps increasing in number or at a rate higher than they have been. And I want to address that. Listen, I know that that's something that's been picked up, and this may be part of answering the question. Because when we put the collaborative approach to school safety out, one of the lines in that report got a lot of attention. And that was the line that said, despite the fact that overall suspensions are decreasing dramatically in TDSB, if we stay on the current pace that we are at now, we will have more violent incidents in TDSB than we have ever had. So then the question becomes, incidents are decreasing, but these violent incidents are increasing. What does that say? And here is how we have taken up that work. First of all, let me say that with respect to that data, we will come back as part of the collaborative approach to school safety with an update on that number. And I want to tell you how we got to that number to begin with, because I think it's been a question which not only people in this boardroom have asked, but also people at large and communities. We don't produce that number. That isn't a number that is in this report. But when we wrote the collaborative approach to school safety, it was important for us that you had the latest information, especially related to the most troubling incidents that we were experiencing in schools. So what we did, 3 of us sat down, Mr. Raymond in IT, Mr. Libra and myself, and we hand counted the number of violent incidents as defined in Section 310 of the Education Act. And that's where that number came from. Perhaps we can include that data in a subsequent report, but what we will do when we come back to you in the middle of May is update you with respect to the pace that these violent incidents are occurring in real time, which is what we did in the collaborative approach to school safety. We didn't want to wait for a report which was 1 year out or was delayed at some point in the future. So with respect to what do we tell community members who say, great that you're decreasing suspensions, but we keep hearing about all these incidents that are happening in schools and it's of deep concern to us. I would say that it's also of deep concern to us. As we have discussed in this boardroom and beyond, there are many factors in the city of Toronto today which are contributing to community violence, especially amongst younger aged people, which is spilling over into schools. So the data that you had in the collaborative approach to school safety mirrored the data that the City of Toronto and Toronto Police Service has. So again, as part of the answer, there are many contributing factors which exist in society today, which are spilling over into our schools, which we can track through the data, part of which you got through the collaborative approach, which we can put into subsequent reports, which we are addressing through the action plan that the board received after that 9-hour meeting in December, which culminated on December 9th with you receiving the plan. So sorry for the long-winded answer. I just wanted to bring a couple of big pieces together for folks' understanding.
Yeah, thank you, through Mr. Chair, to our Executive Superintendent for the comprehensive answer. I would just highly encourage our staff members to begin tracking the number of incidences and really do a in-depth measurement on the effect that our current work has on the total number of incidents, and by extension, the safety and well-being of all of our students in school. I think there's more than one way of measuring. You can measure you can measure suspensions as a proportion of total incidents, or you can measure total incidents as a proportion of total incidents in the city. There are ways through measurement and analysis that you can isolate and hedge out the different contributing factors to the best of our abilities. I just feel like with this data set, when combined with another data set that comprehensively look into incidents in schools, I think then we can confidently say that the path and the strategy that we are on today is one that is correct and that we should continue pursuing it. All right, so thank you very much.
Thank you. And through the chair, I will only say that I think that when we take that data and incidents into account, I just think it's so important to continue to remind that those numbers cannot be addressed by TDSB alone. This is something that has to be taken up by all levels of government, community agencies and organizations, including faith groups, and that is part of a larger strategy. And I agree completely that inevitably, as our communities become better equipped, then so will our schools. So thank you for the comments.
Okay, thank you, Trustee Lee. Next is Trustee King.
Thank you, through the chair. I've participated in a number of the discipline committee hearings. They're extremely insightful, and I take that responsibility very, very seriously, and really appreciative of the work that has gone. There's a tremendous amount of data here pulled together by Safe and Caring, as well as research. So thank you, because as our executive superintendent prefaced, this really informs more than just the discipline committee process or discipline practices. It really informs both the learning and the anti-oppressive work that we're doing as it affects the learning and the lived experiences of some of our most marginalized communities. So with that said, I have just 3 questions. One of them is just an area where I'm interested in a deeper look at some data. And then I have a question about suspension appeals and about timeline. So in the first area, there's just a few areas where I'm curious to know if we already, or if we could, do the work of going a little bit deeper to understand whether or not there's not only a higher number of incidents, but also a higher severity of overrepresentation of certain student populations, Black, Indigenous students with special needs. So some of the areas that I'm looking at are, does police involvement correlate to any of those groups, increased rate of police involvement? Do the suspensions that are over 4 days versus the ones that are shorter in duration, does that have a correlation to race or to any of the other groups that we know are overrepresented in this process? And also the number of students with more than 1 suspension, which we've heard a little bit earlier. So those are all race-related, race correlations. And then I'm also just curious to know, and I think Trustee Shan asked this question in a slightly different way, but whether or not we are learning anything about the rate of reoccurrence where specific interventions are being used. So trying to identify whether there are certain interventions that are proving to be more successful. I ask as one example is if I look at one of the figures that shows the rate of attendance counseling, it's quite low relative to something like contacting the parents or guardians. But when we sit in discipline committee hearings, we often hear that attendance is a large challenge and a big factor for these students. So I'm just curious about what we're learning in some of those other regards, and those don't necessarily have to be answered right now. But my second question that I am hoping for an answer on is with regards to suspension appeals. So it's noted that there were 102 out of over 3,500 suspensions, and that's feeling to me like it's low. It represents less than 3%. And then we identify 57 cases that have been withdrawn or abandoned. So I'm just curious to hear from staff if there's any insight there on whether or not these are actually being resolved, or if people are abandoning the process for a certain reason. Is there some learning or some kind of barrier there that we know of? Or are we addressing and resolving issues in a way that they're not actually going to suspension appeal? So I'll pause there for an answer before my last question.
So thank you for the question, and through the chair. I think the question is important because it highlights the fact that Section F is just making its second appearance in this report. And I know that it's been of interest to folks. And as many trustees know who are involved in these processes, Dan Nortes does absolutely fantastic work related to these processes. And I think it's important to give him a bit of a shout out here, and also say that in direct response to the question, my understanding is that most of those 57 are resolved by mutual engagement, conversation, trying to work things out between the parties. I don't have the exact numbers to the trustee's question. I can certainly get them, but my understanding is that what typically happens when a suspension appeal comes in is that's another motivating factor for folks to sit around the table and figure it out. And we are becoming better at figuring it out in ways that work for students, so that we don't have to get to a point where people end up investing even more time in these formal sessions, which often become adversarial and don't always end up in a win-win, which we can get if we sit down and try to figure it out.
Thank you, I can appreciate that. I think I would just ask then for just a second look at those numbers just to clarify, because there is a distinction made between appeals settled by parties, which is a figure of 13, and then appeals withdrawn or abandoned, which is 57, and it's the 57 that I really want to zone in on.
Okay. Thank you.
And then my final question is just looking again for more clarity on the timeline around the action plan. So there's a lot of really, really great work identified in the action plan. I'm just wondering what it looks like in terms of timeline beyond the updates that we'll receive in May along with the safety report.
So through the chair, I think one of the things that we've learned when we landed the collaborative approach to school safety is how important it was to be really explicit in the report about some of the timelines and to update with respect to those timelines. What I can say about this report is that there isn't that level of detail, but each and every one of those items in the action plan is ongoing as we speak. Everything that we have listed here is current and is happening in real time right now. So it isn't something necessarily that we're planning to do or that we've completed. The goal of our action plan is to make sure that what we list is in action. And I hear the feedback loud and clear around being more specific with respect to associated timelines. So we'll be able to perhaps supplement this section in upcoming reports.
Thank you through the chair. Again, really just appreciate all the work and the responses. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trustee King. Next is Trustee Dawson.
Hi, good evening through the chair. I just want to say firstly that I really do appreciate all of the detail in this report. I really do see it building on questions that have been received year over year. So I just want to acknowledge the great work done by staff here in responding to questions that have come up over time. Okay, I do have a few questions. So I wondered, so this is sort of a two-part question. How many of the incidents are documented in the Human Rights Reporting Portal? And the reason I ask that is because, well, first of all, I just want to straight up know, but I will give you an anecdote of something that happened in a hearing recently. There was an incident that was not documented as racism because it was from, within the same community. But there was the intersectional layer of one child's refugee status, and that was the cause of hate. And so the principal did not report that as an act of hate. And so I just wondered, what is the tie-in here when an incident happens and it's then determined to be an act of hate, maybe not initially, do we go back and then report it in the portal? Is there a tie-in currently with this data? And if not, can there be?
So thank you for the question, and through the chair. The tie-in at the moment is when Caring and Safe School staff is on the scene and when the scenario begins to be unpacked and there is a clearer understanding that the incident should be reported in the portal. The same happens in the Human Rights Office. So if the Human Rights Office, you saw when Ms. Ibrahim delivered her report at our last meeting, the number of consults. So if the Human Rights Office gets a call and they also believe, based on our shared learning, that it is a matter that Caring and Safe Schools should be involved in, then it's taken up in that way. But there is no formal tie-in at the moment. And I see and understand the question and the importance of creating that link, because that link is absent at the moment, except in conversations that happen with school administrators, which involve Caring and Safe Schools, which involve the HRO as part of consults in order to better support principals if they're uncertain around how a specific situation should be addressed. But if to the question of, Jim, if it's in the report, does it also mean it's in the portal? I can't answer that for sure.
Okay, thanks. Just some food for thought to add
Thank
it for the next time. I'd be very interested to see that. with respect to the low achievement correlation between number of suspensions and low achievement, is that because there's such a high percentage of spec ed students, do we know what that number looks like with them out, or would they be low achievers anyway? Because I recognizing that's based on EQAO scores, and from my understanding is that everyone takes that test irrespective of ability. So maybe if you could elaborate on that.
Yeah, through the chair, I think the question speaks to the important concept of intersectionality, which we need to take up more deeply in this report and also as part of the conversation. We have not disaggregated with students who have special education needs out of the data. We have presented it with everyone that is included. And I think it's important to note that this data could be disaggregated based on many demographic factors. So for example, there's some people who've said, hey Jim, what would happen if we took Indigenous students out of this data? What would happen if we took whatever demographic or whatever identity out? Then we could disaggregate it. But for the purpose of this report and for keeping sort of the spirit of this report in the format that we believe it was intended to come here in, we haven't gone to that depth. But certainly if that's something that we need to do or people would find useful, then we would be happy to continue to work with research services to get us there.
I think it would be very interesting to see that. Yeah, thank you. One more question, actually. So Trustee Arts kind of touched on this a little bit in terms of the question of, do students actually attend caring and safe schools when they have a consequence like this? And so I wondered if, when you do report back on that, if we could see it by length of suspension, who's attending safe and caring based on the duration of their suspension, whether it's 3 or 5 or whatever the increments are.
Will do. Thank you.
And then my last question is, I noticed that there were a couple of K-3 suspensions. Why would you ever suspend a child of that age?
So I think one of the difficulties of that is because there's such a low number, discussing them sometimes risks identifying a child. So we don't typically get into the specific details just because of the sensitive nature of that information. I can only say that when an incident like that happens, it is dealt with in the most sensitive way, and the point of the process is to get that child and the families the greatest amount of support that they can in quick time.
Okay, thank you. That's totally fair. Those are all my questions, and I just want to thank my colleagues for your excellent questions. I'm going to go back and watch this recording because I had a lot going on in the background, but a lot of you are thinking along the same lines as me. Yeah. So I do appreciate your questions. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Trustee Dawson. Next is Trustee Laskin.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Do we ever have, this is all about suspensions and expulsions, but there are incidents that are reported that we try to mitigate against, help kids, whatever. So we have figure 5 about most used interventions by schools that have to do with follow-ups from the suspensions. But do we ever know the number of incidents, potentially the interventions, and then why they're not suspended? Do you know what I mean? Like a little bit the other way around?
Thank you, through the chair. So a couple of points with respect to that chart. That chart is what happens after
right, that's what I
mean. Student
mean.
is suspended. We need to take a closer look at how restorative practice in every school is resulting in fewer children being suspended.
Right.
What is it about the interventions that happen that are preemptive? And it's been very difficult for us to assign attribution for any intervention and how it mitigates against a child being suspended. We just haven't been able to do that because there are often so many interventions. Choosing one and extracting it and saying, the reason why Jim didn't get sent home was because he has a program after school, or because he's been in a restorative circle, or because we called his sister who will be on him no matter what happens. So that is—
Which is true in your case.
Yeah, which is absolutely true. It's the next frontier of the work, I believe. And again, I think that it's important to tie this into collaborative approach, which really speaks to the preemptive nature of the work, and especially around interventions by adults. We heard attendance counselors, child and youth counselors, child and youth workers, social workers, because when a child is in crisis, this is when these types of behaviors occur. And if we can beat it, that's when we know the numbers will really come down.
So just to follow that up through you, Madam Chair, so we don't track the incidents that don't lead to suspension.
Through the chair, no.
Is there any thought of going further into, because the trend is coming down, something must be happening in terms of interventions, how teachers are dealing with the issues and not sending kids to the office. They're de-escalating themselves. They've learned different techniques, etc. Is any of in the reports that you provide to us that information?
Yeah. See, again,
For you, Mr. Chair.
Through the chair, I'm going to say that at this point, no. We know that we're doing a lot. We know that we believe the primary lever is the education and supporting principals to process differently. But again, we can't assign attribution to that because we just don't have the data to be able to do it.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Trustee Laskin. Next is Trustee Rajakulasingam.
Thank you, through the chair. I want to thank Caring and Safe Schools and Executive Superintendent Spiropoulos for this report. I always look forward to the Caring and Safe report because I think it really highlights a lot of crucial information, especially about which students we need to engage and show more support to. And I'm really happy to see that context because I think we're not just saying this kid is getting suspended or expelled, but we're trying to better understand their experiences about who they are and what factors may be contributing to it. And I think comparing suspensions to achievement is extremely important. And I'm reflecting to kind of the conversations I have with one of my superintendents, Superintendent Dilworth, about looking at engagement and achievement in the early stages, especially with our young learners, and that connection to literacy and numeracy to build confidence and engagement from a young age. Anyway, so I want to thank our admin teams and our central staff for helping us get here. In no way do I want to generalize or reinforce stereotypes. So I do sit on a lot of these hearings, and we know that there's a connection between attendance and suspension rates. So I'm just wondering, are we tracking that info? And what is the data telling us?
So thank you for the question, and through the chair, that is data that local schools would be taking up and would be engaged in conversations about, not just with their school-based staff, but also with their superintendent as they address their school improvement plans and the issue of suspensions and expulsions. We believe that starting with every single executive superintendent in their conversations with superintendents, they're asking questions about who is being suspended and why. And then those conversations and the accountability for that filters from the local superintendent to the principals when they sit down. And that we are stressing the fact that that should be a part of every conversation that superintendents have with principals on their school visits and beyond. That's when that type of information would be gathered to be able to establish patterns with respect to example for attendance. And we know one of the most important factors, as was mentioned, is engagement.
Yeah, through the chair, thank you for that. Because you mentioned that, you know, speaking to families is one of a really effective intervention and a form of restorative justice. And I see kind of attendance as part of that. When we are tracking which students are not engaged in our system, which students are not attending school, I find that in these hearings, a lot of times these are also the students that are missing a lot of school. So would we ever consider having kind of in an extra report, looking at attendance rates and comparing that to suspension and expulsion hearings? Are we able to get that data?
Through the chair, I'm absolutely going to check with Dave Cameron in research, and I know Dr. Cameron is really creative in the ways that we were able to put together data. So I hear the level of input, and that's what we need, as I said earlier, to sharpen this work up even more and give you what you need, so you can make the best decisions.
Thank
We'll
you.
be
Through the
rewatching you
chair.
too.
Thanks. And through the chair, my next question is on the OSR. Sometimes, again, I don't want to generalize, but sometimes we find that when a student changes schools, it's when something happens and they're up for a suspension, that's when an OSR may be reviewed for the first time. Again, not all the time, but just sometimes it happens. How do we ensure that we're paying more attention to reviewing the OSR? How are we making sure we're being accountable to that? Because I think, you know, the OSR holds so much critical information about a student's experiences, maybe a special education need, and just their past history that when they're entering a new school, that the admin can use to make sure that they're maybe engaging with that student differently, taking preventative measures so that nothing happens that may lead them to a suspension or expulsion. So how do we ensure we're being accountable to ensuring we're reviewing that OSR each time?
So thank you, and through the chair, one of the things that the 2008 School Safety Panel report recommended to us was that each student who was on a non-discretionary transfer between schools receive individual support with respect to that transition. And as part of that transition, the Caring and Safe School Advisors work with school admin teams to ensure that there is access to that important information. I'll tell you another sort of unintended consequence of what we did with suppressing the records. And I can say this for sure. There are letters received from 5,356 students. So there are 5,356 OSRs that were looked at. And as this happens annually, because this isn't a done deal. This isn't we just did it once and it's over. Principals are going to be getting letters to pull suspension records annually. That's going to get principals and OSRs. And it's going to have them taking a closer look in a change that has been systemic, which will lead them there, in addition to what we're doing through Caring and Safe School Advisors.
Okay. And final question to the chair. You mentioned, and I didn't get the number properly, but I think you said a few years ago we were about 22,000 suspensions. In another 10 years, you know, what is our goal? Is it to abolish the need to have kind of expulsion and suspension hearings? Or is it to get to a place where, you know, Caring and Safe Schools, oftentimes those supports are offered after something has happened? Are we able to, you know, in a perfect world, have those supports offered in every school as a preventive measure? So a student doesn't need to be suspended to have access to those particular supports?
Thank you, and through the chair, I think that's the question I just heard a couple minutes ago. What are we going to do? How are we going to shift what we're doing after the fact to earlier in the process so that we can be preemptive? And I think that's part of our ongoing work. That's what we intend to do with the community tables and the programs that we're offering and the additional supports and the staff that you've committed to, additional adults in buildings. We hope that part of the additional investment by the government earlier today will allow us to do more of the preemptive work, which is critical, because inevitably that's what's going to bring the numbers down.
Okay. Actually, this is my final question through the chair. Are we tracking the number of suspensions that are taking place and then are getting appealed? My apologies if someone asked this and I missed it, because there was an incident recently that I heard of where it was a family where they were not able, where English isn't their first language, and there was kind of a language barrier. And so when this happened, they weren't aware of what next steps, they weren't aware of, you know, why the student was getting suspended and what next steps were to look like. So how do we know that
families are are making use of an opportunity to appeal a suspension.
Yeah, so through the chair, the appeal numbers are on page 19 of the report. And the answer to the question is we don't. But what we do know is that through and typically how the process should work through the chair is that the principal in that ultra important meeting, when they communicate with the parent or the caregiver around what has occurred, they apprise them of the second page of the letter, which talks about the steps. But we know that there are barriers for certain families with respect to that. So part of our work with community agencies, and it's an excellent example of what's happening with Taibu, as an extension of the services they offer for families of students who have been suspended to help them navigate the process. And we know that there are more community agencies who are being funded to do that, public health agencies as an extension of their work, and they've been communicating with us more and more about how to take up the ultra important question that was asked around how about families who don't necessarily have access and don't understand the process. So I think that the communities are mobilizing around that. They've been funded to do that as we continue to become better at supporting families that don't always have equitable access to supports.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I noticed it happened with two different families where you can imagine how emotionally, hard it must be to go through that conversation of a child being suspended and the process of it. So there were two families that had trouble understanding it, and they later got in touch with me. But I hear what you had to say about that, and I appreciate it. Thank you so much, and thank you for the work on this. And I also wanted to say, there was an incident at my school, one of my schools last week, and Anton and Mike from Caring and Safe were there immediately, and I just want to thank them for their support on that as well.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. We really appreciate that feedback. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Trustee Rajagulasingham. We have two more trustees on the list on this item, Trustee Erhard and then Trustee Sriskandarajah. Trustee Erhard?
Thanks very much, and thanks very much for the report through the chair. I wanted to add, I just have a few quick questions. On page 9 of the report, figure 1, it shows suspensions, expulsions by incident location. And this is my first time as a trustee seeing this report. I'm wondering around washrooms and where washrooms are considered or what we're seeing and hearing about washrooms. I'm hearing consistently from deputations, from reports to board, but also from my community, that washrooms are not viewed to be a safe place for many students, or it's an area where there are concerns. But I don't see it as a place where incidents are occurring according to this report.
Thank you, and through the chair, one of the things that we took up as we were updating the report is when folks looked at figure 1 and they would look at other and they would say, man, what makes up 18%? What is the other? So if you notice on page 8, we unpack the other category. So 18% includes spaces such as student washrooms, virtual learning settings, which we don't always get picked up, social media, school buses, public transportation, school common areas, even centers at Parks and Rec where things happen which impact the school climate. I concur with respect to what is being said related to school washrooms. We are doing our very best to address it locally with school principals. It is an issue far beyond TDSB. There are school boards across the province and even across North America who are challenged by what's happening in student bathrooms and the fact that students don't always feel comfortable going there. And we are trying to resolve it the best we can systemically, but that's where the washrooms are picked up, to the trustee's question.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And through the chair, I also wanted to ask around bullying. And this is, I think, around table 4, suspensions by infraction type. And I see bullying as its own category, but there are many other categories that relate to bullying. And so I'm wondering how we distinguish, and I'm wondering if we can get some more information and context on how bullying is categorized versus some of the other types that are defined here.
So thank you for the question. And the category was created as the ministry was attempting to draw greater emphasis with respect to bullying and wanted us to be able to track it specifically. Just to note that when this information is put into our system, the ministry has the ability to take it all up through the ONSYS system. And that's why bullying, when it intersects with the other elements that you note there, it is part of its own category, just because of the added emphasis that the ministry has placed on this in light of not just the damage that bullying causes in schools and classrooms every single day, but because, again, of some of the catastrophic incidents that have occurred around the province that have been attributed to bullying, and the government's intent to be more specific with respect to tracking and addressing these incidents through policy, but also through data.
Okay, thank you. And my last question was around restorative practices, and that it was mentioned by some of the other trustees, and I should say I sincerely appreciate the other trustees' questions and the information that we received in the responses. It's immensely helpful. I wanted to get more of an understanding on what our restorative practices are, and if we have any sense of which restorative practices are being used in that 15%. If there's any understanding we have or any trending we're seeing with that. Thank you.
So thank you for the question. Let me say that for many years, we had an uneven distribution of how restorative practices were taken up in our board. And that's because the great extent of the training was more in the downtown core of schools. And if I'm not mistaken, I'm just looking through my notes here because the name of, I believe it's the International Institute, IIRP, if I'm not mistaken, who is our primary provider. However, this is what we know about the Institute. It doesn't always take into account our commitments to truth and reconciliation, equity, and human rights. So the Urban Indigenous Education Center has been of critical importance to us in ensuring that the framework that we use is inclusive of Indigenous ways of working, but also picking up concepts of restorative justice through the Center of Excellence for Black Student Achievement. So we're in the process right now of expanding the learning. We have more trained individuals in restorative practice than we've ever had. And our ultimate goal, as people have noticed in a collaborative approach to school safety, is that every school in TDSB has someone who's trained in restorative practice through not just IIRP, but taking into account, as I mentioned, our own commitments as an organization, because we know of how significant it can be. The data that you see, if we were able to show you previous trends, restorative practice has surged in terms of its use in TDSB. What we don't know is the impact that it can have preemptively, as some trustees have stated. And when we do initiate it, we expect that it will further support the decline in the numbers.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate the responses and the report and all the work that went into it.
Thank you very much, Trustee Erhardt. Next is Trustee Sri Skandaraja.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, staff, for your report and your work on this and answering all our questions. I just have a couple of questions. So on page 11, when there's discussions of interventions, under the category of other, I think it's at 10%. I just wanted to know what constitutes other. And I think sort of drawing on something Trustee King mentioned, does this include police interventions?
I was quite surprised to see how little police were mentioned in the report compared to how often police are actually called. So if you could speak more to that, that'd be really helpful.
So thank you for the questions. Other has to do with individual circumstances which schools creatively work towards. So for example, if it was a caring and safe school advisor putting a student, connecting a student with a co-op placement, for example, these are out of the box and unique interventions which don't always fit into these categories. So for example, if part of addressing a student issue is supporting them through employment and connecting them to focus on youth, that maybe not, that's not listed there. If part of the intervention involves a mentoring relationship that is developed with a caring adult in the school, that isn't always picked up. I think that what will be important in subsequent reports is to be more specific, just as we did in terms of location, to unpack what the other is, to make sure that it's more evident when people pick up our report.
Thank you. Just because 10% is a sizable number, because I know some of your other ones are less than 10% and they get sort of singled out. Through the chair, but in regards to my question about the police, is the police being called considered an intervention, or would it fall as an intervention in these categories?
No, through the chair.
Okay. Through the chair, is there any future room in your report to allow us to know how many times police are called in these incidences?
Sure, and I always say through the chair, and thank you for the question, that as I've said before, there are instances where staff don't have a choice with respect to calling police. And that is in the violent incidents as the ministry defines them. So for example, in the case of a sexual assault or a robbery or possessing a weapon or physical assault causing bodily harm, which requires medical attention, the police is called. And what we're trending towards is calling the police in those instances.
Yeah, thank you. No, I'm not opposed to calling the police in, certain circumstances. Of course, we want to keep our other children and staff safe, but I think it would be helpful, at least for me, to see in how many instances they are called in these sort of cases. And my last question, could we get through the chair, could we unpack the category of hate? So are we finding that a lot of these incidences are based on sort of race and sort of religious grounds, or is it gender and sexuality? So I just would like to know, because I think the categories kind of sort of lumps them all together, if I'm correct.
Through the chair, yeah, I'm certain that's something we can look at. I don't know that we specifically differentiate, at least when I'm sort of racking my brains looking at the database as when a principal reports that there is a place for a principal to explain further. But let me just check in on whether or not we can further qualify it based on the specific type of hate.
Thank you. Through the chair, I think that's really important, right? Especially when it comes to interventions. If we're dealing with sort of race-based hate, or is it gender-based violence? Is it sort of issues, that target our LGBTQ students? So I think just knowing how that breaks down will inform how we intervene, because of course our interventions will, of course, take a differentiated approach depending on what the issue is. So I think that would be a little bit helpful as well.
Thank you.
So that is all for me, and I look forward to further updates and report. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, we have Trustee Chair Chernes Lynn there as well. Please go ahead.
I have just a quick comment. I just wanted to encourage, sort of based on what some other trustees have said, I would like us to encourage to think to consider how going forward we might be able to track restorative justice, and to link that to, for lack of a better word, recidivism, or number of times that there's repeat incidents with students. And if we were to compare that to suspensions, maybe we would have a better idea about what is, how it's working. And I think that would be important for us to be able to understand what strategies schools are using that are the most effective. And that would help us move forward. So I know one of the things we worry a lot about is, it's important to track these things, but principals have so much on their plates, and how, to give them more to do and all of those kind of things. But I wonder, even if we were to consider doing a pilot project or something, or a study of, a couple of schools and how it's working, what we might learn. So I just wanted to encourage staff to think creatively about how we might collect data around this in the future, and what we might be able to glean from that to inform our policies going forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Trustee Jonas Lynn. That's the end of the speakers list. So we would need a mover and a seconder to accept this report. Do we need to approve this?
Jonas Lynn.
Trustee Jonas Lynn and Trustee Dido. Sorry. Please vote on e-scribe.
Trustee Lee's in favor.
Jonas Lynn in favor.
1 second, please. Hold on.
Sorry.
1 second.
Trustee Patel in favor.
Just 1 second, please. Hold on. We're just getting the setup yet. Just to avoid you having to vote twice. So let's wait. Okay. Those who are not on eScribe, please let us know how you vote.
Sriskandarajah in favor.
Go ahead. Others as well. Go ahead.
Dawson in favor.
Rajagopal in favor.
Jonas Lynn in favor.
Rajwani in favor.
Earhart in favor.
King in favor.
Trustee Sriskandarajah, I think she said in favor. Trustee Sriskandarajah, you said you're in favor, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And Trustee Lee. Sriskandarajah is in favor. Who? No, she said she's in favor. Trustee Lee?
In favor.
Anyone else missing? Okay. I guess the next item is adjournment. Can I get a mover? Trustee Didivides?
Jonas Lynn.
Trustee Yates? All those in favor, say aye or nay. Aye.
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 Okay. The meeting is adjourned. I'm going to pass it back to Trustee Yates for the FPEC. Oh,
Yeah, should we 5 minutes?
Five minutes recess.